A quiet hospital lobby, a place meant for healing, shatters when a millionaire raises his hand and slaps his pregnant wife in front of stunned patients and staff. He thinks his money and arrogance will cover everything, but he has no idea who is watching. Her father is not just any man. He is a CEO with the power to crush empires, and he is about to turn that single act of cruelty into the downfall of an entire company. What follows is a fight for dignity, justice, and truth. And trust me, you will not believe how it ends until we dive in. Let us know the time you are listening and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We would love to hear from you. The hospital lobby gleamed under the sterile white lights, polished floors reflecting the hurried footsteps of nurses and the quiet hum of machines. It was the kind of place where people expected silence, order, and the promise of healing. Families waited anxiously in chairs, doctors whispered in corners, and the faint sound of a heart monitor from an adjacent room echoed through the hall like a fragile reminder of life itself. Into this seemingly controlled environment walked a man who believed he owned the world. His suit was tailored, his watch flashed gold under the lights, and his eyes carried the arrogance of someone who thought money could bend reality. He was a millionaire, and everyone seemed to know it from the way he carried himself. Beside him, his pregnant wife moved carefully, one hand cradling her stomach, the other gripping her purse as if holding onto a piece of herself. The atmosphere was heavy with unspoken tension. He leaned toward her, his voice a hiss that still managed to cut through the quiet. "You embarrassed me." Again. His words sliced sharper than the cold air conditioning. She whispered, her voice trembling. "Please, not here, not in front of everyone. I am carrying your child." Her plea was soft, desperate, but it did not move him. His face hardened, jaw tightening like a steel trap. Without warning, his hand shot across the small space between them. The sharp crack of skin meeting skin rang through the lobby like a gunshot. Gasps erupted instantly, bouncing off the walls, louder than the beeping monitors and the shuffling of nurses. The force of the slap turned her head, strands of her hair flying loose across her pale cheek. Her knees buckled slightly, and she clutched her stomach, instinctively protecting the life growing inside her. Silence fell for a fraction of a second, heavy and suffocating, as if the entire hospital had stopped breathing. Then came the whispers. A nurse dropped a clipboard. A child in the waiting area began to cry. The sound of a rolling cart screeched to a halt as everyone turned toward the scene unfolding in the center of the sterile lobby. Her hand pressed against her reddening cheek, trembling. Tears welled but did not fall yet. She looked up at him, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief, searching for any trace of remorse. Instead, she found only coldness. His face remained stern, almost triumphant, as though the act had somehow proven his dominance. He straightened his suit jacket, glancing around the lobby with the arrogance of a man who believed no one would dare challenge him. The wife swayed slightly, the weight of her pregnancy making it difficult to stand tall after such a blow. Her other hand rubbed across her belly, as if silently reassuring the unborn child. A small sob escaped her lips, caught halfway between fear and humiliation. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, but beneath it lingered something bitter, the sour taste of cruelty and betrayal. A woman in a wheelchair near the entrance whispered to her companion, "Did he just hit her? Here? In the hospital?" The companion nodded, eyes wide, phone already raised, recording. One by one, other patients, visitors, and even a few staff began to lift their phones, their screens glowing like dozens of unblinking eyes. The millionaire finally noticed. He smirked slightly, shaking his head as if the crowd's judgment meant nothing. He leaned closer to his wife again, his whisper sharp enough to sting. "Remember, no one here can stop me." But he was wrong. What he had just done was not only visible, it was unforgettable. The hospital, once a place of healing, had become a courtroom of witnesses, and not a single soul inside could believe what had just happened. The sound of the slap still lingered in the air, echoing like a bell no one had wanted to hear. The hospital lobby, once filled with the quiet rhythm of routine, had collapsed into a silence so sharp it seemed to slice through every corner of the room. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, the only steady sound in a space where even breathing now felt intrusive. For a moment, the world appeared frozen, as if time itself refused to move forward after what had just taken place. Her hand remained pressed against her cheek, fingers trembling against the hot sting of skin. The force of his strike had left not only a mark but a memory burned into her nerve. Her other hand held tightly to her swollen belly, as though her touch alone could shield the fragile heartbeat inside. Her sapphire maternity dress shimmered faintly under the lights, but the fabric was smeared with faint lines of mascara that had already begun to streak down her face. The contrast between the elegance of her appearance and the raw pain in her eyes was unbearable to watch. A soft murmur spread among the onlookers. It began as a whisper between two nurses near the front desk, then rippled outward like water disturbed by a stone. "Did you see that? He hit her. She is pregnant," another voice answered, hushed yet horrified. "Here, in a hospital, in front of everyone." The words carried, picked up by others until the room seemed to breathe the same stunned disbelief. The sound of a chair scraping across the floor broke the tension for a moment. An elderly man who had been waiting for his appointment rose to his feet, his eyes burning with indignation, though his frail body remained rooted in place. Nearby, a young mother clutched her child tighter, shielding the boy's face as if the sight itself was too violent to witness. The child whimpered softly, adding a fragile note of sorrow to the charged atmosphere. The wife swayed slightly, knees weak, breath shallow. The steady beep of a heart monitor from a nearby room pierced the silence with cruel irony. Each electronic pulse reminded everyone present that two lives were bound to the outcome of this moment, and neither deserved such cruelty. She tried to steady herself, inhaling in broken gasps, her lips parting as if to speak. No words came. Instead, a tear slid down her cheek, followed by another, until her vision blurred with grief and humiliation. The millionaire adjusted his cufflinks, his face unbothered, as though the slap had been nothing more than a casual gesture. His arrogance only deepened the horror of the witnesses. People began pulling out their phones, screens lighting up the sterile lobby. A woman near the nurse's station whispered, her voice trembling, "This is going to be everywhere. Look at them recording." Another man nodded gravely. "He thinks his money will protect him, but not this time. Lay." The wife lowered her trembling hand from her face, leaving behind the faint redness of his cruelty. She looked down at her stomach, whispering something too soft for anyone else to hear, a prayer or a promise. No one could be sure. Her mascara streaks deepened as her tears fell, tiny rivers carving through the illusion of perfection she had tried so hard to maintain. The sound of her quiet sobs joined the mechanical rhythm of the hospital machines, a duet of human fragility and technological indifference. The silence broke again when a nurse stepped forward, voice hushed but urgent. "We need to get her checked. Please, come with me." Yet the wife did not move. She stood rooted in place, eyes unfocused, as though leaving the spot would mean accepting that what had just happened was real. The crowd remained suspended in disbelief. The millionaire looked around with contempt, but his wife stood trembling in the center, a portrait of pain. The lobby itself seemed to hold its breath, the walls absorbing the shock of the moment. No one could deny what they had witnessed. No one could forget the image of a pregnant woman struck by the man who should have been her protector. The silence that followed was unbearable, yet he seemed determined to fill it. Straightening his suit jacket, the millionaire lifted his chin and let his eyes sweep across the stunned crowd. The judgment in their faces did not shake him. If anything, it only sharpened his arrogance. His voice rose above the whispers, calm yet dripping with disdain. "You are all overreacting," he declared, his words cutting through the lobby like glass. "She has been hysterical for weeks. You do not understand what I live with. You see one moment, but you do not see the constant provocation, the endless arguments, the way she pushes me." The words fell heavy in the room. People exchanged uneasy glances. A nurse shook her head slowly, disbelief written across her face. The wife remained silent, her hand trembling against her belly, eyes lowered. She did not fight back, not yet, and he took her silence as his permission to continue. He took a step forward, gesturing toward her with a hand that had so recently struck. "Look at her. She knows what I mean. She twists everything I say. She plays the victim. She spends without control. Do you know how much pressure I am under? How many contracts I manage? How many lives depend on my decisions? Stress like mine would break any man, but I endure it. And when she adds to it with her constant complaints, what do you expect to happen?" The audacity of his words rippled through the crowd. A man in a wheelchair muttered under his breath, his voice laced with disgust. He is blaming her. After hitting her, he is blaming her. Another visitor clutched her purse tighter, eyes wide as she whispered to her friend. He thinks this is justification. He thinks we will accept it. The millionaire ignored them all, continuing with the confidence of someone who had bought silence before. You think I am cruel? You think I am a monster? She has everything because of me. The clothes she wears, the jewels, the life she enjoys, all of it comes from me. Without me, she would have nothing. She should be grateful instead of trying to humiliate me in public. His wife finally lifted her head. Her tear-stained face glistened under the harsh fluorescent lights, and for a brief moment her eyes met his. There was no gratitude in them, no fear, only the silent ache of betrayal. But he did not notice. His words kept spilling, cold and calculated. You do not know the truth, he pressed on. She only cares about appearances. She only wants money. She married me for my wealth, for my influence. Everything she has is because of me. And if I lose patience, if I react for a second, does that erase years of generosity? No, it does not. The crowd grew restless. Some shook their heads. A nurse whispered urgently into a phone, her voice low but urgent, calling for security. The millionaire's voice rose louder, desperate to control the narrative before it slipped beyond his reach. She is exaggerating. She is fine. Nothing happened. Look at her, standing there unharmed. This is not abuse. This is a misunderstanding. You people do not know our lives. You see what you want to see. But I assure you, I am the one who has suffered most in this marriage. I am the one who sacrifices. I am the one who deserves sympathy. His words hung in the air like poison. The wife closed her eyes, her shoulders trembling, the tears flowing again. The crowd no longer looked at him with respect. They looked with contempt, their disbelief turning slowly into anger. But still he stood tall. Still he believed his power and his money could rewrite the truth. The millionaire's words still hung in the sterile air of the hospital lobby, heavy with arrogance and entitlement. He stood tall, certain that his speech had reasserted control over the room. Yet the crowd remained unconvinced. Their eyes no longer showed hesitation, only growing contempt. Then, just as his voice began to rise again, the sound of firm footsteps echoed across the polished floor. Each step carried a weight that silenced whispers and turned heads. From the entrance of the lobby came a figure who commanded attention without a single word. A man in a dark tailored suit walked forward, his presence alone enough to change the atmosphere. His silver hair gleamed under the fluorescent lights, and his expression was carved from stone. His eyes, sharp and unyielding, locked immediately onto the scene before him. He was no ordinary visitor. He was the woman's father, a CEO whose reputation stretched across boardrooms and courtrooms alike, a man who had built and destroyed empires with nothing more than his voice. The millionaire faltered for the first time. His lips parted, but no words emerged. He had not expected this. He had not prepared for this. The father's gaze lingered on his daughter first, softening for the briefest moment as he saw her trembling, one hand still pressed protectively against her pregnant belly. Then his eyes shifted back to the man beside her, and the softness vanished. "Enough," the father said, his tone steady and resonant, carrying through the lobby like a gavel striking wood. "You have done enough harm for one lifetime." And Devon, the crowd seemed to breathe again, as though his words released the tension that had gripped their chests. Nurses straightened, visitors exchanged looks of relief, and phones continued recording with renewed purpose. Everyone understood instinctively that the balance of power had just shifted. The millionaire attempted to recover his composure. He forced a smirk, though it looked brittle under the weight of the older man's authority. "This is a private matter," he said quickly, his voice sharp with defensiveness. "You do not understand. She provoked me. She pushed me too far. I am handling my marriage." The father took another step closer, his polished shoes striking the floor with deliberate force. He stood taller than the millionaire, his presence dwarfing the younger man's bravado. His voice lowered but gained even more gravity. "You struck my daughter. In a hospital. In front of witnesses. Do you really believe this is a private matter?" The words hit harder than the slap had, stripping away the millionaire's confidence. He looked around the lobby, searching for support, but found none. Every pair of eyes stared back at him with condemnation. The wife raised her head slowly, her tear-stained cheeks glistening under the harsh lights. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt a flicker of safety. Her father's presence was a shield, a force strong enough to challenge the man who had humiliated her. Her lips trembled as she whispered, barely audible, "Dad." The father's eyes softened briefly, acknowledging her with a subtle nod before returning to the man who had hurt her. His voice sharpened again, each syllable a blade. "You thought your wealth made you untouchable. You thought no one would stand in your way. You were wrong. You will answer for this, and not only to me, but to every witness here." The crowd murmured in agreement, the energy in the room now alive with anticipation. The arrogance that had once filled the lobby dissolved, replaced by the undeniable presence of justice taking its first breath. The father's arrival had changed everything. The millionaire swallowed hard, his face pale, the smirk gone. For the first time, he looked less like a man in control and more like a cornered animal. The silence after the father's words was thick enough to choke. The crowd waited, eyes darting between the trembling wife, the stern father, and the man who had just been unmasked in front of them all. For a brief moment, the millionaire looked cornered, his arrogance cracking under the weight of the confrontation. But then, like a snake baring its fangs when threatened, he lashed out. His voice rose, sharp and venomous, filling the lobby with a brittle kind of fury. "Do you think you can stand against me?" he shouted, his face flushing red. "Do you know who I am, what I control, how much power I have in this city? One word from me and this entire hospital could lose its funding. One phone call and every doctor here would be looking for a new job." Gasps rippled through the crowd. The arrogance was shocking, but more shocking was his belief that such words would save him. Nurses stiffened, doctors exchanged uneasy glances, and patients whispered frantically. The father stood still, his expression unchanged, as though he had been expecting exactly this outburst. The millionaire continued, pointing a shaking finger at his wife. "And you?" he snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think hiding behind your father will protect you? You think you can humiliate me and walk away with my child? I will take everything from you. I will make sure you leave with nothing. No house, no accounts, no custody. That baby will be raised by me, not by some spoiled girl who never knew what real struggle was." The wife recoiled, her hand flying protectively to her stomach, as if shielding her unborn child from the venom of his threats. Tears welled in her eyes again, but this time there was something else behind them, something that looked more like defiance than fear. The father stepped closer, his calm presence towering over the younger man's chaos. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. "Every word you speak reveals who you truly are," he said evenly. "You threaten livelihoods. You threaten your own wife. You even threaten an unborn child. Do you not realize how many witnesses stand here, recording every word?" The millionaire laughed bitterly, the sound sharp and hollow. "Witnesses mean nothing. I have lawyers who can bury this. I have judges who owe me favors. Money talks louder than the chatter of nobodies with phones. You think you can scare me with their judgment? They will forget tomorrow, but my power will remain." Yet even as he spoke, the confidence in his eyes flickered. The glow of the camera phones reflected off his face, capturing his every movement, every threat, every ounce of venom. The crowd no longer looked intimidated. They looked emboldened, strengthened by the presence of the father, and the shared recognition that power without morality was nothing but weakness in disguise. The father finally tilted his head, his calm gaze cutting deeper than any raised voice could. "You mistake fear for respect," he said slowly. "And tonight, you are losing both." The crowd murmured in agreement, some nodding, others whispering that his words had sealed his fate. The wife's hand tightened over her stomach, her trembling easing slightly in the presence of her father's unwavering composure. The millionaire looked around, desperate for support, but found none. Every pair of eyes condemned him. Every phone captured his unraveling. His threats had not restored his dominance. They had exposed his desperation. And as the weight of silence returned, heavier than before, it became clear to everyone watching that the man who once believed himself untouchable was beginning to collapse under the very power he claimed to command. The tension in the lobby had reached its breaking point. The millionaire stood surrounded, but instead of retreating, he chose the path of cruelty. His eyes blazed with a desperate fury. his pride unable to accept the weight of judgment pressing down on him. He stepped closer to his wife, his hand grabbing her wrist with a roughness that made her cry out. "You will not walk away from me," he spat, his voice echoing through the sterile air. "Not here, not ever. You belong to me. Everything you have belongs to me." Gasps erupted again. A nurse rushed forward, but hesitated, uncertain whether to intervene. The wife tried to pull her hand free, her mascara-streaked face twisting with pain and shame. Her swollen belly pressed against the fabric of her dress as she struggled, her voice breaking. "Please, stop! You are hurting me!" The millionaire only tightened his grip. He yanked her toward the nearest chair, forcing her to stumble before the eyes of every witness. "Sit down!" he barked. "Sign the papers. Admit you are nothing without me." From inside his jacket he pulled a crumpled envelope, shaking it open with trembling hands. The contents spilled onto the floor. Documents, contracts, the edges of what looked like a draft divorce settlement. He shoved the papers toward her, his demand ringing in the air. "Sign it. Show them you cannot survive without my name." The room erupted in chaos. Visitors shouted, patients protested, and several phones zoomed closer to capture the moment. A woman near the nurse's desk cried out, "She is pregnant, you monster! Leave her alone!" Another voice rose above the noise, furious and clear. "This is abuse! Someone stop him!" The wife's tears fell freely now, splashing onto the papers he had forced into her lap. Her hands trembled, the pen he shoved at her clattering to the floor. She shook her head weakly, her voice breaking into sobs. "I will not. Not like this. Not in front of everyone." But the millionaire leaned down, his face inches from hers, his words venomous and loud enough for the entire lobby to hear. "If you refuse, you walk away with nothing. No home, no money, no child. I will bury you, and no one will remember you were ever mine." The cruelty of the moment was unbearable. The father clenched his fists, his jaw tightening, but he did not move yet. His silence carried weight, a patience sharpened into steel, waiting for the right moment to strike. The crowd shifted restlessly, their anger mounting, their sympathy for the trembling woman solidifying into outrage. The wife's mascara ran in dark streams down her cheeks, her dress damp with tears. She looked around the lobby, her humiliation complete, her suffering made a spectacle by the man who was supposed to protect her. The fluorescent lights above cast her shadow, long against the wall, the image of a woman broken before strangers. And yet, in the reflection of a phone screen raised high, her suffering was also being transformed into evidence, a record that could not be erased. The millionaire straightened, holding up the unsigned documents like a trophy, his voice booming with false triumph. "You see?" he sneered, turning toward the crowd. "She is nothing without me. She cannot even refuse me here, in front of you all." But he was wrong. The crowd did not see weakness. They saw cruelty. They saw his arrogance stretched to its ugliest form. They saw a man stripping his wife of dignity in a place meant for healing. And in that moment, the humiliation was no longer hers. It was his. The lobby still vibrated with the weight of the millionaire's cruelty. His words had been loud, his actions vicious, and the documents on her lap felt like chains meant to shackle her forever. For a moment, it seemed as if she might collapse entirely, swallowed by the shame forced upon her. But then something inside her shifted. Her trembling slowed. Her breathing steadied. She looked down at her stomach, her hand resting gently over the swell of life growing within her. The tears on her cheeks were still wet, but her eyes no longer shone with despair. They sparked with something different, something stronger. It was resolve. Slowly, painfully, she pushed herself to her feet. The papers slid from her lap and fluttered to the floor, the sound of their crumpling cutting through the silence. The millionaire stared at her, his eyes narrowing, uncertain. She stood tall, shoulders back, chin lifted. Her voice, when it came, was no longer broken. It was clear, firm, and filled the room with unexpected power. "Enough," she said. The single word rang out, commanding attention. Every conversation, every whisper, stopped. The crowd turned their eyes toward her, astonished. She took another breath, her voice steady now. "You will not control me. Not anymore. You think I am weak because I carried your child. You think I am powerless because I trusted you. But I am not weak, and I am not powerless." The millionaire's face twisted. his smirk replaced with disbelief. He stepped forward, his voice rising with anger. "You dare speak to me like this? After everything I gave you? After everything I sacrificed? You are nothing without me." But she did not shrink back. She met his glare with unwavering eyes. "No," she replied, her voice sharper now, cutting through his rage. "I am nothing because of you. You tried to strip me of dignity, of safety, of love. You tried to silence me. But today, in front of every person in this room, I will not be silent anymore." A murmur of approval rippled through the lobby. People nodded, their phones still raised, recording every second. The father watched his daughter, pride softening his stern features. He had been ready to step in, but he knew this moment had to belong to her. It was her voice that needed to break through the cruelty. The wife took another step forward, closer to the man who had humiliated her. Her shoulders squared, her tears drying into lines of strength across her cheeks. "You will not take my child. You will not take my home. You will not take another piece of me. I am done being afraid of you." The crowd erupted in quiet applause, some clapping softly, others nodding with fierce approval. The sound filled the sterile space with warmth that had been missing all night. The millionaire recoiled, his face pale, his confidence slipping like sand through his fingers. He sputtered, searching for words, but nothing came. Her transformation was undeniable. Only minutes earlier she had been crumpled in shame, mascara streaking, body trembling. Now she stood as tall as the fluorescent lights above, her presence commanding the entire room. She had reclaimed her voice, and with it, her power. The father finally stepped closer, his voice low but steady, directed at his daughter. "That is enough, my child. You have said what needed to be said. Let the truth carry the rest." The wife nodded, her strength unshaken, her eyes locked on the man who once believed he owned her. For the first time, he looked afraid. The room was still charged with the echo of her defiance. She stood tall, unshaken, while the crowd absorbed the weight of her words. The millionaire, red-faced and seething, struggled to regain control, but his bluster now rang hollow. Then, from behind her, her father stepped forward. His presence alone drew every eye, the silence deepening with anticipation. The older man carried a leather briefcase in one hand, its polished surface glinting beneath the fluorescent lights. He set it gently on the counter of the reception desk, unfastened the clasps, and drew out a thick stack of documents. Each movement was deliberate, steady, and filled with authority. The air shifted. This was not simply a father protecting his child. This was a man accustomed to commanding empires. "Let us end this charade," the father said, his voice calm but carrying the weight of judgment. He turned to face the crowd as much as the millionaire. For too long he has hidden behind money and arrogance. Tonight, you will see the truth. He held up the first document, the company's quarterly financial report. "This," he announced, "is the proof of his fraud. For months he has diverted funds, hidden debts, and lied to his investors." Gasps spread like wildfire. Phones zoomed closer, cameras flashing as witnesses captured every word. The father placed the report on the counter with a sharp slap, the sound punctuating the accusation. Next, he revealed a set of signed contracts. Here are the deals he manipulated, agreements forged through deceit. His empire is not built on brilliance, but on theft. His tone never wavered. He did not shout. He did not need to. The truth itself was loud enough. The millionaire's face drained of color. He lunged forward, snatching for the papers, but the father pulled them back with a look of unshakable calm. "Do not embarrass yourself further," he said coldly. "Every copy of these records has already been secured. By morning, the courts and the press will have them. You cannot erase what has already been revealed." The crowd erupted in whispers, disbelief mixing with vindication. A man near the back spoke loudly, his voice filled with awe. "He is finished. His company will collapse." Another added, "She is not the weak one. She is the daughter of the man who holds everything in his hands." At that moment, the father revealed his final card. He pulled from the briefcase a sleek folder embossed with the seal of a powerful corporation. He opened it slowly, his eyes fixed on the trembling millionaire. "You never realized who she was," he said. "You thought she was only your wife. But she is my daughter, and I am the CEO who owns the majority of the very company you depend on for power. You built nothing. You controlled nothing. You were merely a tenant in my empire." The wife's breath caught in her throat, her tears now mixed with astonishment. She had known her father was powerful, but never had she seen him reveal the full weight of his authority so openly. The millionaire staggered back, his hands trembling, his voice cracking as he tried to deny it. "This is a trick. These papers mean nothing. None of this can be true." But the crowd had already decided. Their eyes no longer held doubt. They looked at the father with respect and at the millionaire with contempt. The phones recorded every second, ensuring the truth could not be hidden again. The father gathered the documents and placed them back into the briefcase, his voice firm. "You thought your money made you untouchable, but tonight, your lies are undone, and your power ends here." The lobby had transformed into a courtroom without walls. The father's revelations hung heavy in the air, and the evidence was undeniable. The millionaire, once so proud and untouchable, now looked cornered and stripped of every ounce of authority. His eyes darted from the documents to the crowd, from the glowing phones to the cold stare of the man who had exposed him. For the first time, true fear flickered across his face. The buzz of incoming notifications broke the silence. Phones across the room lit up with breaking news alerts. The scandal was already spreading. Headlines flashed: "Millionaire CEO accused of fraud. Hospital incident captured on video. Pregnant wife assaulted before witnesses." The weight of public opinion was no longer in his favor. Investors began to act quickly. Even as the crowd watched, messages poured in from boardrooms and trading floors. "Pull out of his company," one executive whispered into a phone. "Sell everything before the markets open." The words traveled like fire, each one another blow to the empire he had built on deception. The millionaire's hand went to his phone, trembling as he tried to call someone, anyone who could save him. But each attempt ended with silence or rejection. His partners no longer answered. His allies no longer existed. The very people he had boasted of controlling were now fleeing, unwilling to be dragged down with him. The father watched him with steady eyes, his expression neither cruel nor triumphant, but resolute. "You see," he said softly, his voice carrying across the lobby, "power without integrity is nothing. And tonight, everyone can see what you truly are." The crowd murmured in agreement. Some recorded every moment, others whispered with satisfaction. Nurses who had once been afraid now shook their heads openly, their disgust clear. Patients, visitors, and staff alike had witnessed the unraveling of a man who believed himself invincible. The millionaire's voice cracked as he tried to regain control. "This is a mistake," he shouted. "I can fix this. I will sue all of you. I will silence every last one of you." But the threats rang hollow. His voice lacked conviction. His words carried no weight. At that moment, a security guard stepped forward. His presence was calm, professional, but his eyes were firm. "Sir, you need to come with us," he said. "The police have been notified. They want to speak with you immediately." The crowd erupted in murmurs again, this time with satisfaction. Justice was no longer a distant hope. It was unfolding right there in the sterile lobby. The wife, still standing tall despite her swollen belly and tear-stained face, watched him closely. There was no pity left in her eyes, only clarity. She had endured his cruelty, his arrogance, and his threats. Now she saw him as he truly was, a man stripped bare of power, desperate and alone. He shook his head wildly, backing away as if the walls themselves were closing in. "No," he muttered, his voice breaking. "This cannot be happening. I am untouchable. I am—" His words collapsed under the weight of the truth. He was nothing. The father placed a steady hand on his daughter's shoulder, grounding her in the midst of the chaos. His voice was quiet, but carried finality. "He will answer for every wound, every threat, every lie. The world has seen, and there is no hiding now." The crowd nodded, their eyes filled with certainty. The once mighty millionaire had fallen, and his downfall was no longer a private matter. It was public, permanent, and irreversible. And as the cameras continued to record, the man who once believed he owned everything now realized the price of betrayal. It had cost him his company, his reputation, and the last shred of respect he would ever hold. The storm that had consumed the hospital lobby slowly began to fade. Security led the disgraced millionaire away, his once proud figure reduced to a shadow of fear and desperation. Phones recorded until the moment the doors closed behind him, sealing his fate outside of the sterile white walls. The crowd exhaled collectively, a release of tension that had hung heavy for too long. What remained was not chaos but clarity. The wife stood at the center of it all. Her sapphire dress was still streaked with tears and mascara, but the weight that had bowed her shoulders earlier was gone. She stood tall, her hand resting gently over her stomach, her eyes calm and steady. The humiliation that once clung to her had been burned away, replaced with a dignity that no one could take from her again. Her father remained close, his hand firm on her shoulder, his presence both protective and respectful. He did not speak immediately, allowing her silence to fill the space. The crowd watched her, their expressions shifting from pity to admiration. She was no longer the woman who had been struck and forced to suffer in silence. She was the woman who had stood, spoken, and endured until the truth revealed itself. A nurse stepped forward cautiously, her eyes soft. "Are you all right?" she asked. The wife gave a small nod. "I am," she replied, her voice steady. "For the first time in a long time, I am." The words were quiet but carried across the lobby, reaching every corner. The father's gaze softened as he looked at his daughter. "You are free now," he said gently. "Free to live without fear, free to raise your child in peace." His words carried not only reassurance but a promise, one forged in the fire of justice. The lobby erupted in soft applause, not loud or chaotic, but steady and sincere. Strangers who had witnessed her pain now bore witness to her strength. Some wiped away tears, others nodded firmly, as though they too had been reminded of the power of truth. The wife inhaled deeply, letting the sterile scent of the hospital fill her lungs. It no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it felt cleansing, like the air after a storm. She glanced at the scattered papers still lying on the floor, the unsigned contracts meant to chain her to humiliation. Slowly she bent down, picked them up, and tore them in half. The sound of ripping paper echoed with finality, a symbol that she was no longer bound by his threats. Her father extended his arm, and she accepted it. Together they walked toward the exit of the lobby, not as victims but as victors. Each step carried her further from the moment of violence and closer to a future defined not by cruelty, but by strength. The crowd parted for her, not out of fear but out of respect. Outside the hospital, the night air was cool. The stars scattered like small lights of hope. She lifted her face toward the sky, tears brimming again. But these were not tears of pain. They were tears of relief. She whispered softly, almost to herself, "We are safe now," her hand caressing her unborn child. Her father stood beside her, his expression solemn but proud. "No betrayal," he said firmly, "can hide from the light of truth." The words hung in the air like a benediction, closing the chapter with clarity and grace. The hospital doors closed behind them, leaving the echoes of the night inside. Ahead lay a new path, one not defined by shame, but by dignity, justice, and freedom.